The Arnold P. Gold Foundation's vision is that healthcare will be dramatically improved by placing human interests, values, and dignity at the core of teaching and practice. To that end, the Gold Foundation infuses the human connection into healthcare. We engage schools, health systems, companies, and individual clinicians in the joy and meaning of humanistic healthcare so they have the strength and knowledge to ensure patients and families are partners in collaborative, compassionate, and scientifically excellent care. Today, we are pleased to bring you a thought leadership webinar featuring an innovation that embodies the Gold Foundation's mission. We welcome the Penn State Hershey Physician Writers Group.
I think the Physicians Writers Group is a very important initiative for our department. And the reason why I really champion this is it's an important opportunity for our faculty to really reflect on some of the things that they've had emotional experiences with and unique encounter in delivering our patient care. And this is a venue in which they can express their experiences, to reflect and have a closure. And this serves as a creative opportunity to have some thoughts that have been within them for a long time to be really written with words and to share with a community of people. And the feedback so far has been that this has been absolutely outstanding experience for everyone engaged, and the output has been amazing. Most of the faculty, if not all, have published in first-rate journals their reflective work. And for me, as a department chair, this is just one of the most important things that can happen, because a lot of these physicians are really clinical faculty, clinical educators, and don't always have an opportunity to publish or have this venue. And with this program, Kimberly Myers, who heads the program, has done an amazing job of getting people engaged and really have this thoughtful, reflective expression. And so far, I would have to say this has been one of the most successful programs that I've initiated, and for these reasons I will continue to advocate or expanding the program. And certainly the feedbacks that have come back has been that this has been great for resilience, fighting, combating physician burnout, and has been a powerful tool for well-being and satisfaction and being able to express their inner thoughts.
I was 24 years old when I interviewed for admission to medical school. I wore a black suit, carried a leather notebook, and had acne. "What makes a good doctor?" the interviewer asked. "Lifelong curiosity and education. Medicine changes and physicians have to keep learning throughout their careers," I replied. "What kinds of things do good doctors need to learn?" "Things change in medicine. Doctors have to keep up with new treatments and procedures to serve their patients well." "Anything else?" she asked. "Hard to say." I paused and broke a sweat. "What do you mean?" "I mean just what I said. Do you think you'll need to learn anything else to be a good doctor?" "What else is there?" I am a third-year medical student on the trauma service. We are called to see a young man who has been shot in the head. When we arrive, he is dead. His hair is caked with blood, and there's a large gash in the back of his head. The chief resident asked me to clean off the guy's scalp and sew up the wound. I don't understand why. Why should I sew up his head? I ask. He's not bleeding anymore. He's dead. Perfect patient to learn on, stud. Practice suturing and page me when you're done, the chief replies. I find everything I need to do the job. Towels, soap, scissors, suture, tweezers, and forceps. I try to scrub the wound, but his head wobbles back and forth. I brace his forehead with my left hand and scrub with my right, which works well. Red soapy water and clots drip onto the floor. I pat his scalp dry with a clean towel. I pick up the scissors and tweezers and trim the edges of the wound, cutting away small bits of fat, hair, and skin. His head looks clean and the wound is nicely prepped. I open the sutures and pick up the curved needle with the forceps. His hair makes a crinkling sound as I squeeze the edge of the wound with the tweezers. I punch the needle through one side of the wound, then the other, and pull the skin close. I tie a two-hand square knot. I repeat the procedure and practice a variety of knots. I have one suture to go, and the wound is almost closed. It looks much better. A nurse interrupts me. "Hey, how much longer are you going to be? His mother's in the waiting room. She wants to come see him," she says. "His mother wants to see him here?" I ask. "It's her son. How much longer?" "Give me 2 minutes." I place the needle and scissors in the sharps container and throw the other supplies in the trash. I grab a towel, get on my knees, and clean the blood off the floor. I lift his head and wipe off the gurney. I see some blood on his ear and quickly clean it off. I gently pull the sheet up to his shoulders and smooth the wrinkles. He looks good. My 2 minutes are up. I walk over to the nurse's station and stand there, not sure where to go or what to do. I hear the automatic doors open and look to my left. I see the young man's mother. I watch her eyes scan the room. I see her face change as she recognizes her son. She moves towards him. She quivers. She twists. She places her hand on the side of his head and chants about how beautiful he is. And the gash is invisible, and there is no blood on his ear.
After you've been a doctor for a few years, you realize that your hands are a wonderful extension of your mind. Like the hands of a violinist, they possess a sensitivity and a wisdom all their own. As you learn to trust them, they will help make you a good diagnostician. I offer 2 small Imagist poems entitled Wisdom of Fingers. Light touch, soft belly, warm sun on the skin. Deep touch, firm mass. Clouds move across a darkening sky. My fingers see what I don't want to see. The second poem. I feel something there her body doesn't want seen. My fingers are wise.
This triad of Imagist poems includes the 3 most common physical symptoms we address in hospice and palliative care. I am a symptom management expert, but unfortunately, I'm unsuccessful far too often. This is pallier à toi. From the deep, a wave, a heave, yet nothing. Sour sickness persists. In the gloom, gaunt and green, a reach and a retch, release. Nausea. Worn out, winded and white, gets out a few words, pants, and then two more. Despite paradoxical pumping, she can't catch her breath. Dyspnea. Always awake, grimacing through the grinding, clenching, and the catching, curled like a fetus, enduring, or at least trying to. Pain.
I wrote this during a difficult time in my medical career. My job had become somewhat ordinary, and I was yearning for a creative outlet. This is what led me to reach out to Kimberly in the first place and join the Physician Writers Group. In the first meeting, I was reflecting on my past experiences growing up, which were rooted in expressions of creativity, and mourning what I saw as a loss of that aspect in my work as a physician. However, the writing of this piece actually was therapeutic and instilled me with a new sense of optimism, as I found the rich and creative possibilities within the field of medicine itself. A portrait of the physician as a young man. The 8-year-old boy was going to be an artist. As soon as the metallic clanging of the school bell signaled the end of class, his fingers swapped the hard, yellow No. 2 graphite for the worn edges of compressed charcoal enveloped in a wooden jacket. He relished breathing in the aroma of an unmarked page of his sketchbook as his mind planned the first stroke. Ordinary objects would become something transformed through the movements of his hand. A dilapidated wooden house on Riverside Road became a sinister mansion full of conjuring witches and lurking goblins. A geriatric basset hound became a still portrait of a household pet in the final throes of death, her milky eyes and revealed ribs a sign of her body surrendering to the unrelenting pull of time. The imaginings of his mind were brought to life on paper, and the boy knew he had found his calling. The 12-year-old boy was going to be an architect. His class assignment had been simple: build the strongest bridge using the smallest quantities of toothpicks and glue. The challenge electrified him. He must render something calculated from his mind through his hands. But unlike sketching, there were limitations. This creation must be a fusion of utility and design. The boy's bridge would need not only to be elegant, it had to fulfill a function and extract the highest capability from a finite supply of resources. His sleepless nights were filled with planning and design. Crumpled sketches on yellow graph paper and worn-down pink rubber erasers littered his bedroom floor. A straight edge and protractor were never far from his reach. The boy constructed and assembled, carefully creating a complex meshwork of triangles, columns, and arches using wisps of wood and white Elmer's glue. The toothpicks had formed a bridge that was powerful and sturdy, yet sleek in form. It met the challenge, withstanding even the heaviest burden brought against it. This must be what I'm meant for, the boy thought, as combining design, economy, and utility was a challenge like none other. At 15 years old, the boy was going to be a musician. He had discovered the trombone, a shining brass instrument with its expressive curved bell and smoothly moving slide. The vibration of his lips inside the mouthpiece could create a unique sound, then instantly transform it by a gliding movement of the slide. He was hooked. The expressions he could create were endless. A melodious, golden sound adding elation to a concerto, a booming, dark timbre bringing menace to Holst Mars, the bringer of war, and a playful sequence of growls, scoops, and glissandos in Hancock's Chameleon. His hand synchronized the slide to the conductor's movements and the markings on the sheet music. His ear adapted to identify the beats, chords, and time signatures so his trombone could melt into the ensemble. Becoming a musician demanded a combination of his intellect, senses, and discipline he'd never even imagined. At 18 years old, the boy was going to be an actor. He was cast in the lead role of a local television drama set in the classrooms and dorms of his own campus. But what started as a favor for his friend's college thesis soon became all-encompassing. He learned to read the words in the script and transform them into the body of his character. The drawing back of his shoulders and rise of his chest to show confidence, a falter in his voice and clenching of his jaw as his character revealed feelings for another, his cheeky grin and sparkling eyes capturing the joy and excitement of overcoming a challenge. The boy learned to let his body, voice, and expressions be the creation itself. The boy was now a 32-year-old physician. He had been enraptured by the profession's promise of fusing science, communication, problem-solving, and service. But his job had become routine, even ordinary, and he couldn't find the creation in his work. He explained ascites to a middle-aged widow with alcoholic cirrhosis, sketching a picture of the liver, portal venous circulation, and its various connections to help her understand why her belly was filling with straw-colored fluid. A young man presented with extensive weight loss and painful masses erupting throughout his skin, bones, and lungs. The physician constructed a careful plan to obtain a diagnosis using the least invasive procedures at the lowest cost to the patient. An older man visiting his grandchildren had presented with shortness of breath and episodes of losing consciousness. The physician placed his stethoscope gently against the hoary chest, his trained ears detecting a sound that was foreign. Listening for the pitch, onset, and tone helped him determine that a critically narrowed heart valve was the culprit. His last patient of the day was an older woman who had been hospitalized with heart failure, discharged, and shortly readmitted with the same problem. The patient's partner was irate, accusing that she had been discharged too early and declaring her physician, nurses, and hospital incompetent. The physician sat down in a chair next to the patient, and her partner narrowed his shoulders, leaned forward, and listened to their story. Then he softly spoke careful words to address their concerns. That evening, the white light from the computer screen washed over his bleary eyes as he began to finish the piles of work that were yet undone. The aroma of brewed coffee wafted through the air. It was the end of another long day, and the physician felt hollow. His days were full of reading charts, writing notes, and submitting billing codes. He dimly recalled his past life. The specter of a boy loomed in his mind. A new sketchbook, last year's birthday present from his wife, lay unopened and sitting in its plastic wrapper on his desk. The physician picked up a colored pencil and tried to sketch, but his hand was clumsy, and the drawing before him was a cluttered mess of shapes. His trombone, its brass now rusted along the edges, remained shrouded in black felt. He lifted the instrument from the case and put it to his shoulder. Placing his lips in the mouthpiece, he tried to play, but could only make a sputtering off-key sound. The physician laid the trombone down and sat back at his desk. Who was that boy, that confident creator? The physician stared at his computer screen. He closed his notes and opened a new document. The blank white page stared at him, the cursor blinking over and over again. It was both invitation and mockery. The boy began to write.
This images poem is regarding something I do every day as a kidney specialist. And this relates to examining a urine sample under a microscope and identifying changes that helps understanding the disease process. It is called vision. Amber urine, spin, don't splash, drop on glass, focus, here it comes, crystals and casts.
The title of my piece is TGV, or Transposition of the Great Vessels. We were alone, mother and son, you in your blue cap with 10 fingers. I smelled your perfectly shaped head, wished for a perfectly shaped heart transposed. The surgeon said we couldn't get him off the heart and lung. Impossible to hear, imagine, I abandoned my son and his senses. Hours then, He is stable. My transposition, nerves floating in hell, walked back to earth, back to you and the room of that amazing baby boy.
Night call. The phone ringing at midnight propels the startled cats off our bed, catapulting me from a green landscape. Still vaguely present here or there, with chilly sweat and thumping pulse, I hear the familiar story. His fifth and final admission now, as before, fever, low counts, faint pulse, slowly dissolving, muscles relax, memory fades, and I'm walking through a daytime countryside, dappled with morning sun. Ahead of me on the path, a man stops and turns to catch my eye. With a nod and a smile, he's on his way, and then is quickly gone. She invades my reverie again. Doctor, you understand? Like a camera sharpening focus, I awake and promise to come. Headlights probe the black and sticky night. I remember his thumbs up as he listened to my advice while impudent cells were reclaiming his blood. The rough road to remission no longer passable. Relief and sleep are what we seek. I'm not sure why I go. To be there. Busy nights on call are a part of our responsibilities as physicians. These busy nights rob us of sleep, and when we finally get a good night's rest, it's a precious commodity. I generally fall asleep quickly and soundly, and when phone calls suddenly awaken me, I'm occasionally in a sort of marginal state, with eyes open and talking, but not necessarily connecting with the person on the other end of the line. Night call takes place during the final hours of the life of one of my favorite patients. He was a 30-year-old man dying of acute leukemia, following an unexpectedly long survival for that disease. I had come to know him and his family quite well. This patient and I had already had those difficult decisions about death and dying, and he was at peace with the inevitable outcome. So the trip to the hospital that night was probably more for me and the patient's family than for him. In the lines, muscles relax, memory fades, I'm attempting to describe the physical changes that occur as I allow the vivid dream to draw me below the surface. This is that sort of in-between state of being, only partially awake. There are two different scenes in the poem: the morning countryside of my dream world versus the here and now, middle of the night phone call.
Quiet companion. Your steps on the stairs no longer wake me. I continue to listen for your floorboard scratch. Your impression on our weathered couch remains. I see you slumbering there. Your hoarse calls still echo. I imagine feeding and blanketing your withered frame. You signal then have completed your final season. Come, my feline companion, let us rest together. Treasured memories and comforting presence, you gave us great joy. So I think all of us at some points have experienced some form of loss, and out of that loss some great discovery, and for some of us maybe an attachment to a pet. This was my case, and I think for many people as well. I'm mindful of a patient of mine when we had paper charts that instead of a picture perhaps of a family member, they had a picture of their beloved dog with them. And so in our family, as I think in many families, pets, in this case a cat, we've also had dogs, have given us cherished times together and great joy that we keep with them. And I'm reminded
for my patients and their families, whether it's a service animal or just a beloved domestic cat such as we had, that oftentimes it is the pet who sort of looks after us and takes care of us, and again, we're very fortunate to include them in our lives.
Still, Alisha died quickly. The color of her skin rapidly changed to gray once the ventilator was removed, and her eyes remained open, staring at nothing. I said goodbye to her and then talked with her parents outside her room. Looking back, Alisha never really had a chance. Diagnosed at 13 with acute myelogenous leukemia, AML, she went from her pediatrician to the emergency department to the pediatric intensive care unit, all in a matter of a few hours. When she was admitted to the PICU, her white count was over 300,000 and she was struggling to breathe. Within a day, she was intubated. Nothing was breaking her way. It took roughly a month for Alisha to get off the ventilator and be well enough to be transferred to the oncology unit. It was there that I began to get to know her. She was about as low maintenance as any patient could be. Always cooperative, polite, and thoughtful, she welcomed a nurse with a needle as graciously as a guy with a pizza. She would also talk about her concern for her family long before she would express any worry about herself, saying things like, "I'm worried about my dad. He's a bit overweight and all this stress isn't good for him. Will you talk with him?" When she did talk about herself, it was brief and focused. "Can you help me with this pain?" Then we would discuss her worries, and just as quickly as she raised them, she would sit upright in bed and fold her arms across her lap. Her bald head and large eyes motionless, she would stare at the far wall. Her jaw was firmly set, yet she looked tranquil. I eventually figured out that it was my cue to leave and return another day. 8 months passed while Alisha endured the standard AML therapy. She was hospitalized more than usual because her troubled lungs never fully recovered from the PICU. Her clothes hung on her previously athletic frame, and her movements became deliberate. At times, her growing frustration was expressed in terse comments. At one point, she even got rebellious, refusing to eat, hiding food in the trash in an effort to quell the barrage of demands for her to get some nourishment. Finally worn out, she returned to the PICU, her lungs no longer able to sustain her. On the night she was dying, her parents asked me to be with her as the IV lines, catheter, and ventilator were removed. I remember the medical resident talking to her as she removed an arterial line. I had thought this particular resident was a bit cold and crass until that night. At one point she said, "Okay, Alisha, I'm going to take out this line. I hope it doesn't hurt." The concern in her voice and the gentleness with which she applied pressure to the wound changed my opinion of her. When it was all over, we stood there in a kind of benediction. Later that night, as I left my office, I moved down the dim hospital hallways. The normally busy thoroughfares were quiet and empty. As I walked out into the night, I stopped suddenly, noticing a handful of cars driving by in the distance. I was mesmerized by their headlights and wondered, where are they going? Standing there in the cool night air, I noticed a flagpole, 2 benches, a plaque, and a sweeping landscape that was offset by the road on the horizon. The wind blew, and a metal clasp on a hoist struck the flagpole rhythmically. One after another, the cars kept coming and going. Disembodied, I felt like an observer of the world moving by me, yet also somehow wholly connected to it. I wanted to freeze the moment in my mind so I could remember its fullness. For that instant, I was still.
Isolation without contact. She is in street clothes, her husband in the hospital bed. She watches us enter as we adjust our yellow gowns. "Wash in, wash out," the sign says. The Purell evaporating from our fingers, we pull the gloves over our hands. Gowned and gloved, we examine her husband. She watches us in her street clothes. To put this poem into context, many hospitalized patients are in contact isolation as a result of being colonized with resistant organisms such as methicillin-resistant Staph aureus or vancomycin-resistant Enterococcus. Sadly, such patients often were given these organisms as a souvenir from a previous hospitalization, a colonization event that might not have occurred if all healthcare workers always washed their hands and cleaned their stethoscopes. And consider that these patients will be placed in contact isolation every time they are re-hospitalized, perhaps for the rest of their lives. A strange fact about contact isolation, which is intended to prevent healthcare workers from carrying resistant organisms to other patients, is that many hospitals do not require visitors and family members to gown and glove. In fact, we discharge these patients home to those family members, who must find this practice confusing. And the irony, of course, is that our gowns and gloves for contact isolation separate us from our patients and result in isolation without contact.
I wrote this poem after caring for a young boy in Malawi who came to the hospital with a bowel perforation from typhoid fever. In addition, he was severely malnourished and had malaria. He had a rigid abdomen from peritonitis, so there was no option other than exploratory laparotomy. The small bowel perforation was identified and closed. When I left Malawi, he was recovering, but ever so slowly. The staff didn't think he would survive. It was only after I returned home that I learned he had survived and that the staff referred to him as Miracle. Miracle. In this desolate place, they call him Miracle. Wasted, defenseless, and ravaged, his distended abdomen draped by skeletal arms. Typhoid may lurk in that belly. He winces with every movement, catches with every breath. Brown iris halos float in vast white scleras. Dilated pupils refract vulnerability at these wholly unfamiliar visions and odors. When has he seen such white sheets or smelled iodine? When has he seen tiled floor or blood on it? That day watching his sister die? Anesthesia, incision, inflammation, raw blood and bile-stained viscera. I explore until juice oozes from the puncture. Repair it, watch saline irrigations run clear. It is finished. Now, from cool cotton sheets, his breathing easy, softer eyes glance at me, a legitimate claim to his new name.
What I wanted to hear. Routine ER page. He says it's a COPDer. This will be easy. Nebs, steroids, O2, home in a day. What about the murmur, I ask? No worries, it's innocent. Just what I wanted to hear. Admit to floor, return to bed. 3 a.m., nurse is calling. It looks worse. I can't breathe. Smell of fear, lunge for my arm, dead. Autopsy, pinpoint aortic stenosis. Fixable. This work of flash fiction recalls an event from my medical internship that describes how my complacency in accepting another physician's diagnosis led to a patient's preventable death. From this incident, I learned that it's important to be thorough and to trust your observations and intuitions. The final verdict, fixable, was a judge and jury that haunts me still. I'll never make the same mistake again.
The Joy of Medicine. It's about the man who pilgrimages to Talladega every October because you stented his widowmaker, and the couple celebrating their 60th who asked everybody to stand up and clap when you walked into the VFW hall. In the time you were in the shower and you thought about what the wordy lady told you in the office the day before, and you ordered the blood test and prescribed the right pill, and all was well, and it would not have been. And looking back now, believe it or not, it's answering the stat page at the Little League game in the bottom of the fifth, right before Maggie hit the ball to right field and slid into third with a triple. And leaving the warm bed with the candles burning to speed to the ED to sew up the drunk's aorta, and when you got home, she was sleeping. But most of all, it's about the long-haul trucker who runs to Reno twice a week, who doesn't know he should be dead, but you do.
The humanities department in the College of Medicine at Penn State is the oldest humanities department in the country. There are a lot of humanities programs around the country and some humanities departments, and this happens to be the oldest one. And it's been a great venue for faculty to explore a variety of alternatives to promoting humanism and the humanities. And Dr. Meyer's work, especially the Physicians Writers Group, is a terrific example of the kind of work we really promoted. Dr. Myers has three remarkable talents. The first is actually fairly common in that she's a gifted editor and that she understands both the language structure and understands the structure of pieces, of essays. And so she's facile. And there are a lot of people around the country who are facile, who are in medical schools, who help writers edit their work. She has two other talents, though, that are less common. The first is she's a little like those folks on remodeling television shows who can walk into a house that looks decrepit, where there's rats and broken ceilings and water damage, and they're able to see the potential in the place where all I want to do is run away. She does the same thing with manuscripts. She can take a look at an essay written by a fairly fledgling writer and see the potential. That's the first part of her gift. And the second part is she's actually able to convey that to a fledgling writer. And most fledgling writers, especially physicians who are used to feeling fairly confident in their clinical work, but may feel pretty non-confident in their writing, for them that's an amazing gift because she can help take the germ of a compelling idea and actually get you a finished product that is truly remarkable. And that's a superpower. And that alchemy, in my experience, is really rare.
Greetings from Penn State College of Medicine, home of the first Department of Humanities in a medical school. From our beginning in 1967, our work has embodied the essence of the Arnold P. Gold Foundation's dedication to keep healthcare human. The mission of our Department of Humanities at Penn State is to advance humanism in medicine and society, and a key issue we're addressing with the generous support of the Department of Medicine is physician well-being. We spend a lot of time thinking about physician burnout and what we can do to lessen it. Perhaps the biggest problem with physician burnout is not that there's too much to do. Most people have more to do than they can reasonably expect to get done. Maybe the biggest problem with physician burnout and job dissatisfaction is that the sheer demands on one's time can lead to professional silos, where physicians are cut off from meaningful, sustained interaction with colleagues. To make matters worse, the repetitive demands of clinical practice day in and day out can undermine one's intellectual stimulation and certainly one's creativity. At Penn State, we have an approach to this problem. We're trying something that's a bit counterintuitive to relieve the stress of too much work. We're adding more work, but it's work of a different kind, and it's called the Penn State Hershey Physician Writers Group. This initiative provides a structured opportunity for self-reflection, collaboration,
and creativity, all within a safe space for open discussion of professional issues that have personal consequences. In our workshops, we think and write about meaningful events, patient encounters, and actions that have preoccupied us in some way, either positively or negatively. We tell our stories in a variety of forms, including personal reflection essay, haiku, imagist poem, 55-word story, and free verse poem. Here's how it works, and it's open to all physicians on a volunteer basis. Cohorts of 4 or 5 physicians meet every other week over a 2-month period of time. My professional training is in literature and creative writing, and I facilitate the group. We begin the course with an introduction to a genre. I provide a brief overview of a given genre of writing, like reflective essay or imagist poem. As a group, we then read and discuss 3 or 4 previously published samples of the genre, noting what the writer does, how he or she does it, and the particular details that make the piece effective. After the first week, participants have homework. Each person creates an original work of the genre we have discussed and emails her or his work to everyone else, no later than the same day of the following week. So, say if we meet on Wednesday, the original writing is due the following Wednesday. Another key component of the homework is that colleagues read one another's work, reflecting carefully on these original pieces and assessing them in the same way we assessed the already published samples. Colleagues make marginal notes on each piece of writing to ensure they will have feedback for each author during the workshop. 2 weeks after the original meeting, we gather for a workshop in which each person's writing is discussed in terms of content, areas of strength, and areas for improvement. Discussions include not only the analysis of each person's writing, but also, inevitably, the psychosocial experiences that prompted us. This is where the work of the group transcends the purely professional and moves into a personal realm that often leads to vulnerability and trust. The session ends with a brief introduction to the next genre, and the cycle repeats. Each writer leaves the session with ideas that she has heard, as well as hard copies of the feedback each colleague recorded in marginal notes. Each author then has the entire 2-month period to revise the original pieces, and the group discusses revisions collectively as time permits. If time is limited, revisions and feedback are exchanged via email. Revised pieces ultimately form a portfolio of writings, each of which will be submitted for publication to a professional medical journal. At the end of the course, the facilitator provides a list of publication venues for creative medical writing and works with each participant as he decides where to submit each piece for consideration. Our results have been good. The PennState Hershey Physician Writers Group has published over 40 original pieces in generalist journals like JAMA, New England Journal of Medicine, Annals of Internal Medicine, and Academic Medicine, as well as specialist journals like the Journal of Palliative Medicine and the Journal of Clinical Oncology. If you're interested in creating a similar initiative in your home institution, here are some best practices we've discovered through our experience here at Penn State. Recruiting. Whom to recruit? We've discovered that residents are often too busy to be able to fully participate in the workshops and get the homework done. So mostly the cohorts have been of attendings. This is advantageous for early, mid, and late career physicians for different reasons. How to advertise for recruitment. Find a champion and give a grand rounds. How to incentivize when people are busy. If participating in the group isn't enough incentive, then continuing medical education credits certainly will help. We offer 20 CMA credits for the 2-month period. Logistics, when to meet. 5:15 to 7 on a weeknight is ideal in terms of respecting the work schedules and the personal time of physicians. This limited time of 1 hour and 45 minutes, however, means that there is space only for about 4 people for the workshop each time, because each person's writing must be reviewed and a genre must be introduced and samples examined during the time. What about days? Avoid any days that bump up against the weekend. Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday are ideal. And months. Avoiding holidays and vacations is critical. So the best time we've discovered would be mid-January through mid-March and mid-August through mid-October. Another possibility is mid-March through mid-May. What about the size of the cohort? Again, 4 people is ideal. It's not only ideal because it gives time to give focus to each physician's writing, but also, and this is key, a small cohort tends to allow participants to bond more fully. Place, a conference room in a hospital or adjoining College of Medicine. This limits the time a physician has to walk from clinic and means that usually she won't have to walk outdoors to get there. What about perks? Publication is always good for annual review, tenure, and promotion certainly. Also a network of creativity and confidentiality with colleagues. New writing collaboratives and new projects can emerge from the collaborations in the group. Also, there's a network of trusted specialty colleagues when you might want to refer a patient, for instance. And there's always collective celebration for publications. This is a fine opportunity for public service to your institution. There can be public readings, in courses, professional conferences, local PBS, TV, and radio programs, nearby universities and bookstores. Again, all of which are public service for your institution. There are some really important considerations if you plan to do this. One is that the facilitator should be compensated, similarly to how the physician writers are compensated. A facilitator should be granted a % effort in terms of salary. Staff support. While not onerous, it's always helpful to have someone who can clock CME credits. The group dynamic should be carefully created. It should be supportive, democratic, and other-centered. Each person must commit to be present for all meetings. There can't be absences because then certain people's work doesn't get validated in the same way. Also, pre- and post-course measures should be taken, and course evaluations. This is important to ensure that the goals are being met and it's good evidence for continuing the physician writers group. So far, this work at Penn State has been limited to physicians, primarily because of a shared set of basic experiences. With more resources, it could expand to include PAs, nurses, and other members of the healthcare team. Combining roles in this way would have both pros and cons. Thank you so much, and good luck with your own initiative.
Why do each of you feel this work is so important?
I feel like working with Kimberly as leader of our group and Jeff helped us kind of tap into these feelings we were having as we take care of patients that are difficult to express to our colleagues or to our family members. This was kind of an outlet for that creativity and those complex emotions we were having on a day-to-day basis, and helped us discover ways we were thinking about things or dealing with issues that even we weren't aware of initially.
You know, so Ian and I and Kimberly met in this group this fall, and it was, I didn't know what to expect, and the benefits of it, we've sort of formed this community like really quickly, actually. Just
wow.
that first night together, just sharing about ourselves and our creative histories. The biggest piece for me has been the sort of the group support and being able to share and do this work and feel comfortable, and that came about naturally. It's really nice. Just thinking about it now, it's really nice.
And to build off what Jeff had mentioned also, the sense of community was such an integral part of our experience. I was actually new to Penn State when I approached Kimberly and said I wanted to be part of the group. I'd only been at Penn State a couple of months at that point, so I didn't know anyone, and I didn't know the institution, but I thought it seemed like such a neat opportunity that was available here that I immediately approached her, even though I was not having that much free time at the time. But the sense of community that we built in such a short amount of time, I mean, Jeff and Kimberly and I still keep in touch, and we're working together on other projects.
I'd like to point up another sense of community, which we noticed in our first group. Namely, you have to picture 6 physicians who we all know one another by virtue of consultations and shared referred practices, okay? But we've not talked about our writings. We're all amateurs, okay? And part of the game plan was we would each write and we'd then share our drafts with one another, okay? We were all pretty scared. I like you and I respect you, but I don't want you to see my junky stuff, okay?
You don't know if it's any good.
Exactly. And because physicians are afraid to be criticized, because we're afraid of criticism, because we've all lived through the terror and trauma of that.
Yeah.
So sharing my draft of something which is in my heart and my head but not very polished, sharing that with 2 people whom I may or may not know was a little scary.
If you could impart one thing to viewers, what would it be?
I think I would say don't underestimate your ability to put something really quality down in terms of your own writing. None of us came into this having any real writing skills and really having a lot of experience writing, but we were still able to produce unique, creative pieces dealing with complex themes, with Stephanie's or with Kimberly's guidance. So, I think that would be my biggest imparting message.
It took me almost a year after I was first told to write the piece that I submitted, the essay that I submitted for the first piece. I had been told, actually just a couple days after the event, by someone I trusted, the person I was processing the event with, the death of my grandmother, my 100-year-old grandmother. And the essay that I wrote is about me grappling with trying to be a grandson as well as a palliative care doc while my grandmother dies, and that struggle, that pull. And I get back here, and I sit down with the chaplain for an hour. And I spoke for maybe 57 of those minutes. And one of the things he said is write about it. It took me almost 9 months before I wrote about it. And then this class comes up, this grand rounds comes up about being able to write. And I was like, oh, wow, this is now, I've done it. I've written this stuff down. Now I can take this somewhere and get the help with this piece this event that I am still really struggling with. And it definitely helped me process it.
That's powerful.
So the impact, the positive impact, it's a bit of a network too, I would argue. I've told a few different people, this is much less down the totem pole of helping my dad almost process the deaths of both of his parents. But we had an event a couple weeks ago, and I told the fellow, I'm like, you got to write about this, man. Give it a try. Just write something down.
A true physician is a person who, on the one hand, knows how to use his intellectual career factual database as part of a larger context, a holistic context of understanding himself or herself and the person he or she is dealing with. In order to do that, you have to learn more about yourself than what medical school can teach you. You have to learn how to be in touch with yourself, like Jeff just described. For that, I would highly recommend Kimberly's writing course, not to become a writer. That's not what she's about. That's not what the course is about. The course is fundamentally about learning to write, not to publish. Learning to write in order to get to know yourself better.
Have there been any unexpected benefits to being involved with this?
Yes, I would say for sure. I think I have become more insightful of my actions and my interactions with my patients, rather than following a routine of making a diagnosis and treating with medications. It's like how well you're connecting with them. Before anyone becomes a doctor, we're all humans, and maintaining that human touch, in day-to-day practice. I think I never thought it's not that it's not in us, it's just something gets forgotten and not given the priority on day-to-day basis. It's like rejuvenating yourself with those feelings. I think that was great part of it.
Yeah, that's great. I like that. It's not part of the day-to-day experience. I think for me it was a jumping point for me to start writing other things. So I've always been interested in writing more about my field of diabetes, and I don't think there's a lot of literature. I don't mean scholarly literature. I mean, emotional literature that gets at the feelings and the psychosocial aspects of this. And so for me, it was sort of a jumping point to be able to start a larger project. And so I've been involved with other people, not on campus here, but we just get together and keep each other accountable. And I didn't think of it when I started this as a starting point for different and bigger work.
We're not trained in medical school to write creatively. I mean, some of us might do it on the side or some background, but it's certainly not part of the training in medicine. And this physicians writers group really, with Kimberly's prompting, has challenged us to sort of reach beyond our comfort zone. And as physicians, I think we all carry around many, many stories. Some of which just sort of sit inside of us, some of which we express in a variety of ways, verbally or maybe even have written about them. But what the Physicians Writers Group certainly enabled me to do and challenged me to do was to try to tell these stories in ways that I wouldn't have known how to do or even thought about doing on my own, flash fiction or poetry or some other sort of format, and like Joseph said, get feedback from peers who also have similar backgrounds in some ways and common set of experiences, but also a very different lens through which to comment and critique and give constructive feedback. And it really helped develop a work that wouldn't exist otherwise, and provide an outlet for telling stories that I think are really important to tell.
I think there was great value in carving out the space and time to do this. I had a post-it on my desk for perhaps a decade with just a few words on it about a story that I wanted to tell. It just said The Clock Doctor, and I saw that frequently, and I just never could get around to writing that story. And having this on my calendar as a block of time on a regular basis, there were 4 people in our group, and I didn't really know any of them personally before that. It was just wonderful, and allowed me to write that story, to get it published in JAMA, and in fact to then do other things like write poems.
I remember when we got started, we were looking for ideas, and Kimberly told us to pick something that has made an impression in your life.
Yeah.
Things that happen professionally, the good, but more often those things where the outcome wasn't what we would have hoped, or the decisions we made perhaps could have been done a little better. And when one talks about those things, all of us in the group have similar feelings. So it develops a certain camaraderie when you make yourself open.
Yeah.
And I think for me, reflecting on those kinds of things has broadened my professional character. I think I look at patients in a little different ways. Not always, but it gives you an added dimension, I think, that many physicians who are kind of moving along fast-paced don't really experience because they don't really reflect on those activities.
Hearing colleagues tell their stories or reading their stories, you project yourself into that situation and say, how did that ever happen to me, or could I think of myself in that situation? And it does round us out and make us better people. So that has to benefit patients.
I think the kind of the going back and forth and thinking about this does significantly affect how I take care of patients, and probably more consciously perhaps than what you're talking about, but that's an individual thing for me. I think for me there's the putting things down in words. Some people say that you can't really think. You have to really put something down in words before you can really think through something carefully. And I think that the putting things down in words is the important thing to me, and it adds another dimension to things, and it helps me see things in a different way. And I think it helps bring order to life. And I think that's one of the things about our lives are so chaotic, and we can't bring order to many things, and so we can't necessarily heal somebody. Hopefully we can heal, but we can't cure them. But there's so many times when we are limited in what we can do, and there's that chaos that we would like to be able to do something about. And in a way, I think writing brings a kind of quasi-order to the chaos that's there all the time. It doesn't solve the whole issue, but there is something kind of reassuring about trying to bring a certain amount of order to things. And I think that factors back into taking care of patients as well.
It also gives us the opportunity to redo something. When we're taking care of patients, what we do is done. But when we're writing and we revise and revise and revise, it gets to be better. So the whole process of revision and seeing a product that's the result of that is something that, as physicians, I think we often don't get experience with. And it's very positive.
And I think this kind of a group probably wouldn't fly unless there was the right person behind this. And it takes a person who's really insightful into kind of understand where we're at, and I think can kind of understand how medical minds work and don't work sometimes.
As a surgeon, I think in a pretty concrete way. And what I've been impressed with is the value of ambiguity in a situation when you're writing. In my life, ambiguity didn't have a role in my professional life. But as Kimberly pointed out, and my colleagues, if you add an element of ambiguity that can be interpreted in different sorts of ways, it kind of brings the piece alive. And it's another process that we don't really experience ourselves very often.
Yeah, you sort of related to that. I think one of the things I really learned through this process that I didn't expect was about the meaning that is communicated between the words and in what's not being said and what's left out and the pauses and the hesitations. And sometimes it's that which is absent which communicates the most information. And that's really interesting.
Pretty unique benefits or unseen or unexpected tangents or benefits from this is that I've actually now been teaching poetry to med students, photography and poetry. And you'd asked me 30 years ago, Joe Gasho, do you think you'd be teaching med students poetry? It's like, what? Get out of here. I don't have the skills that Kimberly has, but I learned a lot from doing it, and that's really been a little bit scary, but it's been a little fulfilling part of what I have done professionally to not just talk about the heart and how the valves work and don't work, but to bring in this other stuff has been really fulfilling to me.
So Kimberly, Dr. Dan Shapiro had mentioned that you have a gift for cultivating these physician writers. What would you say to that?
Wow. Well, thank you, Dan Shapiro, for saying that. I think the most important thing, whether it's a gift or whatever, is to realize that these are people who have achieved prominence in their field. I mean, they're very, very gifted as physicians, but they've never written before. So it's really important to see where they are and to see their ideas and how they might develop those ideas so that they can feel proud of something that they did. So I think that I've heard some of the physicians talk today, and a comment was made that one would have to be careful about who would facilitate the physician writers group. And I think the important thing is to realize that we're not trying to make these people into William Faulkner or William Butler Yeats, but we're trying to help them tap into the talents that they already have so that they can tell their stories and find gratification in that way. So I think it's just really important to go in with a kind of humility. And even though I'm the literary expert in the mix, they have the stories. It's about them. It's not about me, and it's not about me teaching them. It's about pulling out of them what they already have inside them.
That's perfect. That's beautiful. That is beautiful. So I also wanted to know, what is the impetus for your work? It almost seems like a calling for you. So what is that touchstone?
Wow. Okay, so I'll tell you an origin story, and that was when I first joined the College of Medicine in 2007. I was the editor of a literary magazine that's in-house, and every year we have a premiere for that literary magazine where the people who are the authors or the photographers or the artists come and they read their material, they show their material. And there was this giant of a person, Joseph Gasho, who got up and read a poem, and it was quite delightful. And as a literature professor, I thought, boy, that's pretty good. So I went up and introduced myself to him and said, that's a really good poem. I would really like to talk to you about your poetry. And he sort of looked at me. And so we made an appointment, and we got together, and that began a collaboration that just sort of snowballed in a beautiful, beautiful way. And so then word sort of got out that this was something that could happen, and other people would say, oh, can you talk to me about this poem? I'm thinking about writing. Well, that was wonderful for me because I'm a literature professor in a medical school. This was good. And so then I started thinking, you're spending a lot of time here with individuals. What if you could somehow pull them all together and let them experience one another as well? Because then you get a multiplicity of responses, not just my response. And that was sort of the impetus for the group. In terms of a calling, teaching has always been my calling. I think I came into this world knowing that I wanted to teach, and for me, teaching is not, telling people what to do or how to do it. It's inspiring people to become who they can be, their best selves. And so I find it so rewarding to work with these physicians who, again, are so proficient in their own sphere, and yet they have these hidden talents that have never been tapped. So I love that part.
That's beautiful, and it's lovely that it started with a human connection between you and Joseph Gasho.
Absolutely, and the touchstone, I love that word. Thank you so much, Pia. The touchstone for me is I've been a patient, and that's a large part of the reason that I moved in the middle of my career from a university, a research university, into a medical school. And it's because of my own and my family's experience with illness. And so the touchstone for me is always what it feels like to be a patient and what I want in my physicians. I want a physician who knows what it feels like to be sick. I want a physician who knows what it's like to take time to think about another person, to sit and reflect on what's going on in her mind. Those things mean a lot to me as I'm receiving care.
Yes.
Because I think they speak to a kind of fundamental humanity in the physician. So that's always my touchstone. We're all humans. We all suffer illness. We all have joy. And whatever we can do to build those up and celebrate those things is just wonderful.
Yeah, so I really appreciate hearing that. I actually was wondering if there is something about the work that you do which is particularly has added personal meaning or has some personal meaning for you in terms of the work that you're doing?
Well, I can say that the most fulfilling part of this for me is that I get to see these people have a whole different kind of experience. And it's wonderful when, again, they've achieved everything they need to achieve medically, and they take a risk, and they put themselves out there, and they tell very personal stories. And to see how they workshop their work and really work to hone it so that it becomes something they're very proud of, it is a work of art for them, and it is a work of art, period. And so the satisfaction that they get in teams when they're working and helping one another and sharing the stories and talking more about the stories that have been difficult for them in their practice, to see that esprit de corps emerge and to see that camaraderie is so enormously gratifying to me. And then a couple of my more recent physician writers, for instance, emailed me the other day, and they were sharing a patient. And they were up in the wards, and one of them said, "Just wanted you to know that we came out and touched base and said, what would we do if we were in the physician writers group right now?" And so they had a moment, and that is really exciting to me because it means that collaboration transcends the walls of the workshop.
Yeah.
And it carries into their work on the wards. That is the exciting part for me, to know that all of that happens. And then, of course, when they get published, that's exciting too.
Absolutely. It's been fascinating to me has been to hear about how the different pieces transcend the discussions among the physicians, the perspective taking, the learning you were able to experience in reading it and then have that relationship. It's really beautiful.
Yeah, I feel like I'm very fortunate to be able to work with these people. Another thing that really gratifies me is they get to know one another and they talk about their disciplines, right? And so when they then later, this is a big institution, and when they need consults for their patients, they already know the way that their colleagues work.
Yeah.
And so those kinds of, ringing up and saying, hey, and you have a friend on the other end of the line, and I need a consult on this patient, can you help me out? That really is a very healthy way to minimize the siloing that can happen with physicians and the isolation they feel and the feeling that there's nobody out there who really has their backs. So that's exciting to watch, and it's healthy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Is there anything else that you really wanted to share about this work, about the work you've created here at
or even
PennState
impart
Hershey?
advice, about how to do this somewhere?
I think that often it's so difficult to make things happen in medicine because there are understandably so many boxes that need to be ticked and so many hoops to jump through and all that we can get discouraged from pursuing things that we might have a passion for just because it's so complicated and we're all so busy. But I think if anybody out there has an idea to do anything that uses his or her talent, whether it's having a photography group for people, if you're a photographer, and being able to teach people new skills and to edify them in those ways, I would say don't think of all the obstacles, but think of the really huge difference you can make not only to the people you would facilitate, but to yourself and to the institution and to a broader readership as well. Like I think of the publications that our physicians have, and those publications go all over the world, and they then receive feedback from people who are out there thinking that they're alone in certain situations. That's very validating for them. So I think the one piece of advice would be ignore the critics and persevere.
A 55-year-old man with pancreatic cancer and shortness of breath. When did he first find out? A little ache one day, and then the next a real pain? Or did the food he'd always had 2 helpings of no longer tempt? I know he knows, or does he know, how bad's this crab that's bit and won't let go? The right side of his heart has gotten big from pumping into pipes plugged up with clots of blood. I suck in air through open lips, then stop and blow it out. Tonight, I'll taste each bite, put down my fork before the next, and tell my wife how good she looks.
Comeuppance. The haughty doctor bursts through the door in his crisp white coat, pushing aside students to palpate the abdomen. The diagnosis? Hemochromatosis. Notice the bronze skin coloration and the engorged liver. At first, the patient submits in silence while the students observe in awe. The doctor demands information. How long have you been diabetic? When did your skin turn yellow? Puzzled, the patient slowly muses. Not me, doc. It's my roommate you want. I'm here for a hiatal hernia. Ever so slightly, the doctor's shoulders slump before bellowing, "Who is responsible for this?" And the students turn away to stifle their snickers. This poem was based on an experience I had as a third-year medical student some 25 years ago. I wrote it from the perspective of the medical student that I was, but with the understanding that comes from being an attending physician that I am today. In writing the poem, I tried to show the rise and fall of an arrogant physician, emphasizing various forms of wordplay.
Breaking Good. Chief, military man, barrel chest and crew cut, and so damn yellow. Painless at first, then a gnawing deep in his belly and his back. Makes sense. At first, oxycodone, then spikes in legs, arms, shoulders, head. Fentanyl button, then basal too. Doses this high. He should be dead, except that this is existential dread. Me and the chaplain, colorfully, methodically, we investigate and learn. His wife, 2 years ago. Diagnosis to death in days with morphine. This is what cancer means, what he expects, what he wants, what he's trying to do. He told us his secret and agrees to hear mine. The stent is working. I'm sorry, Chief, but you still have more time. Breaking Good. Days after this conversation, Chief accepted transfer to the local VA's hospice unit, where he lived happily with well-controlled pain for nearly 6 months before he died. This man and his situation left such an impact on my chaplain and me that nearly 2 years after this conversation, we still periodically bring up his name.
This is a 55-word story. It is called Quiet. This is regarding one of my patients who I really connected well with, but unfortunately, he was too sick to be around us for long. His wife takes notes with shaky hands, kidneys stable, cancer progressing. I don't want you to be in intensive care unit again. I don't want it either. Consider hospice. 6 months later, a letter. We appreciated your patience, your gentle manner, your counsel, your e-messages after hours. It is too quiet around here without Randy.
Reflections on a serious heart valve abnormality. Whoever sent you for this test was smart to think the sound she heard was from a malformed valve, 2 cusps instead of 3. She'll tell you when you see her next about what lies ahead. In 15 years or so, an artificial valve. But will she tell you that the pipe beyond the valve could crack at any time? She will not know just what you want to know. Some facts I wish I didn't know, like you. My valves bicuspid too.